So we're going to cover. You want to run the camera on this one? We're going to cover Ambulocetids really quickly. Ambulocetids are the early ancestors of whales. They're often commonly called the walking whales. I'm going to tilt the camera maybe down a little bit. Let's see if we can't. I know that one gets stuck sometimes.
There.
Here, a little bit higher up, get it centered. And there we go. So, Ambulocetids, the walking whales, lived just a couple million years after the KT extinction, which wiped out most of the dinosaurs, except for birds. So, from 53 to 47 million years ago. It's a relatively narrow range in the early Eocene. They are, obviously, they're mammals. In the order Artiodactyla, which we have covered some animals in that order before. These are the even-toed ungulates. Yeah, even-toed. So those are animals like, well, other whales, but also hippos, giraffes, deer were one of the ones you saw when you were looking this up. Buffalo. Honestly, a lot of the animals we tend to associate with being herbivores. The range was roughly Eurasia, a few scattered areas around there. And these were very likely ambush predators. If you want to zoom in, there's a little thing right there on the camera. Let's see. Other way. There we go. So you zoom in. They're kind of shaped, kind of like almost like an otter mixed with an alligator. And they were likely living a lot like alligators, or they would wait on the shoreline and wait for prey to come to them. And they had these very long crocodile-like heads, and they would grab something, pull it into the water. And these animals were decently large-sized for the time, at a time when mammals were still relatively small in the early Eocene. Mammals didn't often get bigger than, well, like a dog today at that time. Horses would have been roughly the size of, a little bit bigger than 12, but not by much. The horses would have been roughly the size of, like, what's a good size on, like a greyhound, like a small greyhound. These animals were 660 pounds, potentially at 5 feet long. That's a pretty big animal for the time, and they were carnivores. We tend to also think of the hoofed animals as, pretty much today, we have no living carnivorous representation from that group other than whales. We often tend not to think of whales as carnivores, but they are the largest living carnivores. They just eat really small stuff. And these animals would live near marshes, rivers, lakes, in forested areas. And a big question about them is why semi-aquatic? Why go to the water? And at a time when the Earth was recovering from mass extinction, there were a lot of open niches. So a lot of animals from the Mesozoic were taking advantage of those areas of the ecosystem. There was also a dip in crocodilian population at this time. So there was open opportunities to take advantage of that semi-aquatic ambush predator niche. And these animals took it. And it's kind of fun to think that they were technically a hoofed animal. But these animals would eventually go on to become whales. And we are going to actually cover another group of whales next weekend. I want to go through a few different groups of whales to show you kind of how they progressed through time. Ambulocetus, while not massive, have a few of the characteristic traits of whales. Their skull bones are a little bit more similar to a whale skull. They have a nice concave snout with the skeleton where it kind of is almost tapered inward a little bit. They started to have a bit fewer teeth, and they had quite large teeth, like toothed whales, like sperm whales or beaked whales today, or actually very similar to dolphins. And their ear structure was very similar to whales as well. So you could already see the things that whales would go on to develop even more already starting in these animals. And animals in the early Eocene, there are other animals like the earliest ancestors of horses, where you could start to see the things that we now commonly associate with them today developing. And you can see how far back it did. 53 million years ago is a long time ago. It's really remarkable, that sort of progress over time. And I'm looking forward to covering the next group of whales. The next group of whales, they're a little bit bigger, a little bit meaner, and a lot more interesting. All right, so that's going to cover this little